This Council resumes the second reading debate on the private Columbaria Amendment Bill 2024. Ms. Eunice Yong, Chairman of the Bills Committee on the bill, will first address the Council on the committee's report. Ms. Eunice Yong, please. President, I submit the report in my capacity as the Chairman of the Bills Committee. The private Columbaria Amendment Bill 2024 seeks to enable eligible pre-cut-off columbaria, that's private columbaria which were in operation and in which ashes were interred in niches immediately before 8 a.m. on the 18th of June 2014, to apply for an exemption. The bill also seeks to enhance the enforcement provisions under the private columbaria ordinance. The Bills Committee held 3 meetings with the administration and invited written submissions from the public. In the course of scrutinizing the bill, members expressed concerns on a number of issues and urged the administration to explain clearly the bill to columbarium operators and provide necessary assistance to allay their concerns. The bill proposes to amend the eligibility criteria for application for exemption. This includes relaxing the date of columbaria commencing operation and the date of columbaria ceasing sale of interment rights. This is to offer the option for pre-cut-off columbaria to lodge new applications for exemption so that they can meet the basic eligibility criteria for exemption. Members relate to views of the trade, saying that the relaxation of the eligibility criteria for exemption is unfair to some columbaria, whose applications for specified instruments have been refused or voluntarily withdrawn. There are also columbaria which have decided to cease operation, as well as those which have been already granted a license. Some licensed columbaria hope to make new applications for exemption so that they won't have to pay the relevant fees for short-term exemptions or short-term leases for niches sold between 8 a.m. on the 18th of June 2014 and the 30th of June 2017. The administration explained that even if the criteria for application for exemption were relaxed, the columbaria whose applications for specified instruments have been refused or voluntarily withdrawn, as well as those that have decided to cease operation, would still be ineligible for application. As for licensed columbaria seeking to apply for a new exemption, like the licensed columbaria, they will be required to pay the relevant fees in accordance with the established policy of the Lands Department if they apply for land regularization for niches sold. Therefore, the amendment proposal does not give rise to any unfairness. The administration has explained this to the relevant operators. In addition, the bill proposes that a columbarium applying for exemption under the new arrangement will be required to prove that prior to the effective date of the proposed amendments, its planning application has not been rejected by the Town Planning Board. Members relate to views of the trade that the proposal is unfair, as applicants who have all along not taken the initiative to submit applications to the TPB will now have the option to apply for exemption. Members invited the administration to consider the latest development in land policy and explore feasible ways to assist columbaria whose planning applications were rejected. The administration clarified that the above specified conditions aim to minimize the impact of pre-cut-off columbaria eligible for the new exemption option on their neighborhood and safeguard public interests. In fact, a number of columbaria had their applications rejected by the TPB, but their applications got approved after they had amended their applications. On penalties, some members are concerned that the bill proposes to substantially increase the penalties for offences relating to interment of ashes and non-compliance with enforcement notices. Members asked the administration to consider the consistency of the penalties and whether there will be any adverse impacts on the trade. Members also suggested that the administration formulate prosecution guidelines in respect of the offences under Cap 630 for the reference of the judiciary. The administration said that having considered the seriousness of the offense, the extent of damage to consumer interests, and the potential gains for offenders, it's necessary to increase the penalties to enhance deterrence and nip the problem in the bud. Besides, most of the views received during the public consultation are in favor of the proposal. Apart from the above concerns, members noted the slow progress in processing applications for specified instruments and the feedback from the trade that the application procedures are cumbersome. Different departments may impose different requirements on applicants. Members urged the administration to enhance the existing one-stop services for Columbaria by, for example, coordinating the requirements of different departments and speeding up the process for land regularization. Members also asked the administration to make use of technology to optimize the public inquiry services. The administration pointed out that the Private Columbaria Affairs Office has already put in place a number of measures to assist applicants. For example, case managers are assigned to provide one-on-one assistance, an application guide was promulgated, and templates are provided for the submission of documents. The administration undertook to monitor the vetting and approval progress, continue to enhance the one-stop services to further speed up the process, and explore the use of AI, such as chatbot, to improve the public inquiry services. Lastly, members asked the administration to put in place measures to protect consumers' interests. That includes offering assistance in resolving monetary disputes arising from the cessation of operation of Columbaria, providing templates for the purchase contract of niches, providing updates on the number of niches available for sale on the thematic website, and studying the feasibility of setting up a registration system for ownership of columbarium niches in the long run, so as to enable the public to freely resell niches or decide on the quantity of ashes to be kept in the niches. This could minimize the risks of the public being defrauded. In response to legal advisors' advice, the administration has proposed a number of drafting and technical amendments to improve the bill. The committee has no objection to the CSAs proposed by the administration. The above is the Bills Committee's report. The following is my personal views on the bill. I support the amendment. The amendment is an important move as we move with the times as well as the development of our society. In relation to safeguarding consumers' interests and ensuring the healthy development of the trade, there is importance to it. This amendment is to avoid massive displacement of ashes interred in private Columbaria. I think this is in line with our culture among Chinese people to pay respect to the deceased ancestors. This will also enable private Columbaria that meet the relevant requirements to apply for exemption. For example, those located in non-highly developed residential areas and those that did not have their applications previously rejected by the TPB, they can continue to carry on with their business in the current scale. 77 private Columbaria are now applying for exemptions and TSOL, including 2 receiving in-principle approval, as well as 9 having the in-principle approval for exemptions, and 66 having the in-principle approval for TSOL. 66 that got the in-principle approval for TSOL, 46 of them only applied for the license. Together with the 2 that have the in-principle approval, we have 48 applications pending approval. If these 48 Columbaria do not get the approval at the end, they will have to deal with the ashes interred, which involve hundreds and thousands of niches. This will cause huge disturbances to the community. For example, the Columbaria will have to reach out to the consumer so that they will go pick up the ashes, and this will require a lot of resources and manpower, as we will have to handle those ashes. This may also involve monetary disputes as well as legal disputes. Massive disposal of ashes interred will not give peace to those deceased. This will also cause huge stress to operators. This will be a huge disturbance to the community. The amendment offers an option to private Columbaria to apply for exemption. This will take care of the needs of consumers as well as the relevant operators. I think this proposed amendment has set out the details for the eligibility criteria, for example, the commencement date as well as the date for cessation of the sale of interment rights. This will give more flexibility to the trade and ensure orderly development of the trade. The amendment also proposes enhancing the penalties. I think there is a need to introduce offenses for those not complying with the enforcement notices. In the past, the highest penalty was $10,000 of fine and 6 months of jail term. Now it is increased to $2 million of fine and 6 months of jail term. On conviction on indictment, the penalty is $5 million of fine and 2 years of jail term. And for summary conviction, the fine is $500,000 and 6 months of jail term. In the past, there weren't serious irregularities, but clearly the penalties weren't heavy enough and there weren't enough deterrents. And this is disproportionate to the potential gains for offenders, and there weren't enough protections for consumers. Therefore, I think the amendment will be able to give enough deterrence to offenders and enough protection for consumers. And offenders would know that if they breach the law, they would have to pay a heavy price. There are also stringent requirements in terms of keeping the ashes. Through heavy penalties, we'll be able to regulate the private Columbaria to eliminate the non-compliant operators. This will ensure order in the trade, and this will ensure positive image of the trade and healthy competition. This will provide protection to consumers. In terms of publicity, I think even after the passage of the bill, the administration will have to work on promoting the relevant laws, especially to the operators. During the scrutiny of the bill, a number of operators reflected their concerns and misunderstandings. For example, some of the licensed private Columbaria, they thought they did not have to pay for the relevant fees for the niches sold between 2014 and 2017. They also thought there would be unfairness if applications under the new arrangement would be allowed if there were previously rejections from the TPB. Apparently, land-related fees have nothing to do with the new arrangement for application, and we have to pay respect to the procedures regarding the town planning board. But it shows that there are concerns among the trade, and so it will take time for the trade to digest the new arrangements. I understand that the Lands Department as well as the FEHD have been reaching out to different government departments as well as private Columbaria to understand the difficulties they face. Some of the issues they face may not have to do with the amendment. However, a number of operators would like to, through this opportunity, reflect their challenges. I think the administration will have to keep in close communication with the trade and enhance coordination, especially cross-departmental coordination, to offer assistance to private Columbaria that face the different challenges. Now I'd like to talk about the progress of processing the applications. As I was speaking in the capacity of the chairman, I already said that there was slow progress in terms of approval and vetting. The ordinance has been in effect for 7 years, and only 13 licenses were issued, and 77 private Columbaria are pending approval for their applications. I understand that some operators have to spend a lot of time, money, and effort in complying with the requirements, including those concerning fire safety, as well as electrical and mechanical conditions. This is understandable, but I think on the administration side, it should make use of technology as well as its one-stop services to boost efficiency. Currently, the application procedures are very cumbersome. Different government departments have to process the applications, and this is not in favor of productivity. I think the government should continue to offer the one-stop services and take the initiative to coordinate the different government departments and offer support to applicants. It should make use of AI to shorten the approval time, to deal with the backlog of cases, and support the development of the trade. All in all, I think the legislative amendment is very crucial to the trade. This can help the trade develop in a healthy manner and at the same time offer protection to consumers. However, this legislative exercise involves various cumbersome amendments to our existing ordinance. I hope the administration will communicate with the trade to dispel their concerns. Thank you.
Mr. Martindale. President, in the past, there were many violations of private columbaria. There were people who bought the niche, but the ash was not interned, and then there were other irregularities. In 2017, the private columbaria ordinance took effect. Since then, private columbaria have been subject to licensing requirements. They need a license to operate. And then, as at the end of December 2023, the private columbaria affairs office had 570 complaints about private columbaria. People suffered losses or in other ways. Now, the Private Columbaria Amendment Bill 2024 proposes stiffer penalties for violations and also relaxing the eligibility requirements for exemptions. This will safeguard consumers' rights and interests. Last May and June, the government consulted the public on this proposal. Each proposal had a support of over 85% in written submissions. This bill has popular support. That means we should amend the law quickly to respond to public demand. Many people plan ahead before their loved ones pass away. They buy niches in advance. So it will take a while before someone buys the niche and the ash is actually interred. So overplacing, overselling do not lead to the exceedance of the limit on the ash right away. Overselling of niches is not authorized, so the agreement to buy such niches has no legal effect, and the ash will end up having to be relocated, and there's no protection for consumers. So the penalties under the bill is modeled on other offenses under this ordinance. That's why, for unauthorized selling of niches, we now see tougher penalties. The maximum fines will now be $500,000 in fines and 2 years in jail. That's for summary conviction. And as for indictment, the maximum penalty will be $2 million and 6 months in jail instead. So I hope the stiffer penalties will carry a stronger deterrent effect. Another part of the bill this time is to relax the criteria for applying for an exemption. The government's position is that we will move this cutoff date. We used to set the cutoff date on the 1st of January 1990. Now this cutoff date will be the 18th of June 2014. And then we will also change the date of commencement from the 18th of June 2014 to the 30th of June 2017. So that means more columbaria can now qualify for an exemption. Now, once the pre-cutoff columbaria obtain an exemption, they will still be subject to some restrictions, but they get to keep the niches they sold before June 2017. So that means we can avoid the large-scale ash disposal, and that will avert the impact on many families. I welcome this considerate and sympathetic approach taken by the government. But I want to point out that even columbaria with an exemption do not meet all the requirements. The exemption is a band-aid. Leaving those non-compliant Columbaria in place for a long time will lead to confusion among consumers, and this defeats the purpose of the regulatory regime, and this is also unfair to license holders. Now, for Columbaria with an exemption, they cannot make new sales or new let of niches. They have no new revenue. So in the end, consumers suffer. The licensing regime started in 2017. So far, only 13 licensees have been granted, and that's very slow progress. Ms. Eunice Yung has already brought up that point. The applications from 77 Columbaria are still under processing, and that's 534,300 niches. Two such Columbaria have secured approval in principle for the license. Two for the approval in principle for exemption. As for the others, they have secured an approval in principle for the TSOL. The government needs to move fast. Now, as long as the Columbaria meet the basic building and fire safety requirements, that's only the first step, because the applicant will still have to meet the other requirements under an exemption or a license. So for applicants with such needs, the government should give them assistance to improve their chances of securing licenses. We should also tell the public about this amendment bill to safeguard public interest. Now, on the exemption, there is concern among the trade. The trade thought no fee applies for Columbaria running before the cutoff date. The government has explained that for Columbaria already in operation before the cutoff date, the fees will still apply. The fees are not part of the amendment bill this time, but given the trade's concerns, the government should explain things clearly to them. Now, from 2018 to 2038, 1.2 million people will pass away. So we will need 800,000 niches, because 65% of that people will pass away. So there is demand for niches. This amendment bill is a necessary step. We should also be reviewing the ordinance and make timely adjustments to protect the public. Niches are rarely reused. Land resources are finite, so the niches are putting pressure on land. We have been promoting green barrier. As at the end of last year, there were more than 9,000 cases involving green barrier. But that's only a small percentage of all the deaths. So let's redouble our effort to promote green barrier. Let's find a more eco-friendly way for barrier so that we can take pressure off niches. I support the bill and the amendments. I so submit. Mr. Stephen Ho. The DAB supports this bill. This is a complex bill. There was a time when we were looking at a bill with Mr. Ip Kwok Him as the chairman of the BC, and then there was another bill with Mr. Gary Chan as the BC chairman. This bill saw a BC discussion chaired by Ms. Eunice Yung. So the discussion has been going on across successive terms of government. We talked about many points. Offenses that are too lenient, and this time there's also an amendment about the 7-day grace period for masons' workshops. 7 days sounds like a long time, but it's 7 calendar days. 7 days pass quickly. You may come across New Year holidays, or the workers cannot show up on a certain day. The government has also been lenient in enforcement because the government understands the trade is also in a tough spot. The trade welcomes the new proposal of 14 days instead, because that will be enough time for the trade to do its job. The matter at hand is more than just about this bill. There's a huge social problem. When we were first discussing private columbaria, the columbaria were very costly. People actually had a hard time securing a burial site. The costs were exorbitant, and then some columbaria also closed down. Those cases are now fewer. And that means the government has done a good job in this area. Mr. Martin now just brought up green burial and also increasing the supply of public niches. There was a time I was the chairman of the panel on food and environmental hygiene. At every regular meeting, we talked about niches. That was an unusual year. The government has done much, I know, but we also have to deal with other matters other than niches. We have to get our priorities right. Many members have already argued that we have to get in touch with the trade. The government also claimed there is no unfairness in the fees. I cannot say this is wrong, but there's a difference. When you pay the amount sooner or later, there's a difference. Now the rules are relaxed. So that means the applicants who applied earlier on, those people put in the work to secure the license before. So they had to rush. And because of that rush to get the license in the years before, those applicants incurred extra costs. Those people had to meet deadlines for fire safety works, for example. They may have to pay 10 to 20% extra in terms of costs. The government writes off such factors. So given the many years we spent discussing the matter, I would like the government to turn its attention to the pressure in costs for operators. The government may want to write off those extra costs for the operators. But the extra cost may be exactly what drove some operators out of business. So I would like the Secretary to note this point. Now I want to thank the government for adopting a comment from the DAB, and that's about relaxing the grace period from 7 days to 14 days for masons workshops. And this shows the government has been responsive. I can see extra steps have been taken. Mr. Martin Liao just brought up green burial. But I want to point out that the pressure is still there on niches. We used to do just burial and then there was cremation, and now we're promoting green burial. But work remains ahead for fishermen cemeteries. So those fishermen have to turn to private columbaria. So there may be smaller demographic groups. Now for the rural committees, they have their own burial sites as well. Because for those sites, you can only bury the bodies. They cannot even use niches. So the government should do a full review of such cases. So once again, I thank the government for the work and we support this bill.
Ms. Jovi Chen. Thank you, President. I speak in support of the Private Columbaria Amendment Bill 2024. I'm a member of the Bills Committee. I'd like to thank the chair of the Bills Committee, Ms. Eunice Yung, for coordinating the process. When we were scrutinizing the bill, we were following up on the opinions and views of the trade. We're facing an aging population in Hong Kong. We see a high demand for private columbaria in Hong Kong, but some of the facilities are not managed well, and because of various issues, including shortage of land, a lot of citizens in Hong Kong, they have difficulties with looking for niches for the deceased family. Some pre-cut off columbaria because they couldn't be granted an issue, they had to close down, and this caused massive disposal of ashes. This bill proposes a new application arrangement allowing certain columbaria that meets the requirements to apply for exemption. There are 59 columbaria that cannot sell or let out niches. For 200,000 niches with ashes interred, if the ashes have to be disposed of, it would cause huge disturbances. So it shows that the government is being pragmatic in proposing this legislative amendment. This bill is enhancing the enforcement power of the administration to penalize those that do not comply with the enforcement notices, and this is also to prevent overselling and overplacing of niches. If operators they oversell or overplace niches on conviction through summary procedures, the penalty is $2 million and 6 months of jail term, and on indictment it's $5 million and 2 years of jail term. This is deterrent enough, and these offenses or these breaches of law would hurt consumers and the order of the trade. Therefore, we need the operators to comply with the rules strictly. The law stipulates that private columbaria cannot sell interment rights if their licenses or exemptions are revoked or suspended. After the passage of the bill, we will be able to prevent any unscrupulous operators from exploiting the loopholes and affecting the operation of the market. This will ensure fairness, and I believe the administration will enforce the law stringently. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the administration for listening to the trade's views. The Bills Committee got the submissions from the trade, and we managed to dispel the trade's concerns. We actively followed up on the views, and there were arrangements for us to communicate with the trade and explain to them about the new arrangement. Niches are crucial to those with family who passed away. The administration is responsible for ensuring that citizens have sustainable options for niches, and the trade has the responsibility to comply with the rules. The government should encourage green burial. If situations permit, there should be more niches, and the construction of new columbaria should be sped up. It should study how facilities could be expanded to meet people's needs for niches, and there should be platforms that provide clear information so that citizens could inquire about the relevant prices and costs. There should be more education about our burial culture to encourage citizens to go for green burial. Lastly, I hope the government as well as the trade will work hard together to ensure the healthy development of the trade and protect the interests and rights of our citizens. Dr. Starry Lee, I speak in support of the Private Columbaria Amendment Bill 2024. I am a member of the Bills Committee. The bill seeks to amend the existing ordinance so that pre-cut-off columbaria that meet the requirements could apply for exemption under the new arrangement. Penalties are enhanced, and this amendment bill targets offenses that do not comply with the rules. This is to improve the regulatory regime. The legislative intent is good. This is to avoid massive displacement of ashes as well as disturbances caused in the community. As Mr. Stephen Ho said, this amendment has sparked different views. Some are of the view that this will result in unfairness. I hope the government, as it considers further amending this ordinance, it will take into the consideration of the trade's views. The background to this ordinance is complicated. Every time there is an amendment, it will affect the interests of various stakeholders. People look at this from different perspectives. I am a LegCo member representing Hong Kong. There is a major hotel in the Hong Kong district, and there are lots of private columbaria. Many local residents said there were coexistence of both private columbaria and residences. So I'm glad that this amendment is going to help deal with the problem. With both homes for the dead and the living, well, I hope that this bill can be passed as early as possible to reduce the disturbances on local residents. The private columbaria in the district are still there because there are many funeral parlors there. The application procedures are cumbersome. I believe many private columbaria did not meet the requirements. That's why they did not make the applications. But upon the passage of the bill, I believe we can effectively reduce the number of new private columbaria in the district. But in terms of the disturbances caused by the facilities, I think the administration will have to follow up on them. I thank the administration for taking on board our views during the 2 tomb sweeping festivals every year. And also at other times there are a lot of worshipping activities which cause disturbances to the local residents. The administration took on board our views. In the past, the incinerator was only opened during the tomb sweeping days. Recently, the administration accepted our views to extend the opening hours of the incinerators to weekends as well as weekdays so that people don't have to burn joss papers on the streets. I hope that after the passage of the bill, there are ways to better tackle the disturbances caused to the local residents in Hong Kong. As many members have said, the time for applying for exemptions and licenses is long, and applicants have to go through different government departments. That's why there's still a huge backlog of cases pending approval. I appreciate that the government will continue to offer the one-stop services. On different occasions, we've asked the administration to offer these services. I hope the officers in charge will follow up on the issues. For applicants, even with the one-stop services, it's difficult for them because there are many requirements imposed on them, and there is a lack of coordination between government departments. Now, application procedure is cumbersome, and also you are going to impose a deadline for applicants to submit papers. I hope you will be innovative to ensure that the application procedure will be expedited. Now, I believe that even with the passage of the bill, some ashes will have to be displaced. This may involve different family members or consumers. We are seeing a higher supply of private columbaria. We have the one in Zhenchui as well as the one in Wohop-shek. As far as I understand, it takes time to get the niches. Can you communicate with the trade to avoid hassles? Also, I hope the government will continue to be innovative and flexible. I appreciate what the government has done. Some operators told us, now according to paragraph 62 of the report, many applicants are facing requirements concerning fire safety and so on, and I know that there are alternatives now for the applicants. In the long run, should there be a registration system for the ownership of columbarium niches? This may facilitate the renewal of ownership, but a lot of technical things will have to be sorted out. I hope if there are further amendments to the ordinance, a balance could be struck in this regard. Now, I hope the government will continue to offer the one-stop services so that it can speed up the application procedure for exemption. Also, I hope the officers in charge would pay attention to the facilities. Hongham as well as the North District are the districts with a high number of funeral parlors. We want to avoid any hassles to the trade as well as the local residents. In the long run, we'll have to deal with the planning for funeral parlors. We have to identify suitable sites for placing these funeral parlors. I think if this can be dealt with, then things can be improved across the territory. This is a strong view from our district. We have talked about it for years, but we haven't really seen any results. I hope the official is aware of this. In the Hongham district, there are 3 major funeral parlors. Is it appropriate for these parlors to be in the urban district? As we try to move with the times, I believe we can identify more suitable sites for these facilities. Please don't forget about this, Secretary. I hope there could be a more satisfying answer for this problem in the future.
Mr. Benson Look, President, I speak in support of the Private Columbaria Amendment Bill 2024. I'm also a member of the Bills Committee. I was involved in the scrutiny work of the bill. Over the past 20 years, the number of private columbarium in Hong Kong has been on the rise. There are still operators who are yet to comply with the planning requirements, land lease, or building safety. It results in conflicts and social problems. As a result, the government introduced the bill to introduce a licensing regime under the Private Columbaria Ordinance to protect consumers' rights and enhance and ensure that the operators are using sustainable operational approach. The ordinance was enacted on the 30th of June 2017. Now, before the enactment of the law and the existence of the regime, some members of the public have already purchased niches for interment. Some ashes have already been interred. So the bill, besides regulating new operators, will also adopt a pragmatic and sympathetic approach to handle cases of pre-cut of columbarium to to avoid large-scale displacement or disposal of ashes. This will affect families which have purchased niches, and it will cause social unrest. Now, the bill will seek to regulate pre-cut of columbarium. Now, many Bills Committee members were concerned about the fairness of the exemption regime. According to some operators, some other operators had made application to the Town Planning Board to change the land use of the site for a complying purpose. However, the application were refused by the TPP. At the same time, there are other operators in the trade with non-complying land use, but application has never been made to the TPP by these operators. So one of the eligibility conditions for applying for exemption under the bill is that the applicants must not have had an application refused by the TPP. So some members are worried that this would cause unfairness to operators who did file an application to the TPP and was refused. And for those complying operators, they think the new regime is unfair to them because it's essentially stripping them, depriving them the option for applying for exemption. Of course, the TPP's decision should be respected because we have to ensure that the columbarium are not located in densely populated areas. Now, some applicants have run into difficulties in applying for a license since the enactment of the ordinance. I will not labor these points because other members have raised these issues. Now, considering the overall public interest and also to avoid disposal of ashes, that's why this bill is introduced. Now, according to some operators of private columbarium, the government has promised to assign case manager to applicants and coordinates the application with them. Now, according to some operators, interdepartmental meetings have been organized for them to render assistance. Now, we will keep monitoring the progress of the government's work. I think we share the same goal, that is to avoid large-scale displacement of ashes. Now, in terms of ash disposal, I'm quite worried about the 33 private columbaria, which are yet to comply with the conditions of the license, and also the 18 columbarium, which have withdrawn their applications. Now, some 8,800 sets of ashes are involved in this columbarium. Now, in case of an ash disposal operation, thousands of families will be affected. Now, the PCAB or the PCAO has offered directions in terms of ash disposal, and also they have explained the requirements and procedures for handling displaced ashes to the public, and also a set of procedures have been set for ashes which are unclaimed. Now, generally speaking, family members would like to avoid moving the ashes of their ancestors because it would cause emotional distress to them. So I hope that sufficient assistance will be rendered to all affected families. I so submit. Dr. So Chang-Wing, Deputy President, a decade ago, there was a serious shortage of supply of public niches. There was a period when the deceased cannot find a niche. Now, also, there was a lot of chaos in the private market. In 2017, the ordinance was enacted. At present, the supply of public columbarium niches has returned to normal. However, there are still lots of problems in the private market. After 7 years of practice, there is still much room for improvement. The administrative efficiency is low. Only 13 licenses were granted and 5 exemptions were approved. The backlog is 77 cases. So altogether, some 530,000 niches. The future is still uncertain. Now, to avoid a major displacement of ashes, the government is seeking to relax the eligibility for application of exemption. Now, eligible operators can continue to operate at the current confined scale. That's why I speak in support of the Private Columbaria Amendment Bill 2024. The bill proposes to relax the application eligibility for exemption to allow certain pre-cut of columbarium, that is, those columbarium in operation on the 18th of June 2014 with ashes interred, to apply for an exemption and continue to operate at the current confined scale without triggering an ash disposal operation. The conditions include that they are not located in densely populated areas. The bill will also enhance the enforcement efficiency concerning overselling and overplacing of ashes. There are new offences and an enhanced penalty for non-compliance of the enforcement notice. Now, the bill demonstrated the government's determination to avoid triggering an ash disposal operation, but it also highlights the government's low efficiency in its administrative work in handling applications. Now, there are different departments are working cross-purposed, and the procedure is complicated. One has to approach the fire services department, the FEHD, and the lands department for approval. And there is a lack of coordination and communication between departments. There are views that this bill is just buying time for the government's slow work. Now, according to the administration, for the cases being processed, there are some serious contraventions, and there are also land planning issues to be resolved. The administration has said that it has sped up the approval process by expediting the approval process, enhancing interdepartmental communication, and making a pledge for departments to offer their comments on application. Now, these are all evidence that the government is trying to make this work. Now, according to the administration, after the passage of the bill, the government has confidence to clear the backlog. I believe that the government is sincere in resolving the problem. It just needs time to resolve the issue. In any event, application process involving multiple departments has been slowed for many years. And also in the private columbarium markets, there are lots of contraventions and major rectification is needed. Still, we need to set a reasonable timetable to clear the backlog of application. So the bill offers two pathways for the government to address the issues. Now, on one hand, the government will enhance and streamline the approval process. However, there is still the issue of departments working in silo. Now, this is an extraordinary condition warranting extraordinary solution. So I believe that red tape should be removed and a high-level steering committee should be established to steer the change to ensure that the eligible applications with merits can be approved as soon as possible. Now, second, some operators are bound to cease their operation because they are unable to fulfill the conditions. The government must be prepared for a major ash disposal operation. Assistance should be offered to the affected family members to apply for a public niche. Unclaimed ashes must be stored properly, and also other follow-up support must be given. Now, for license, for private Columbaria, which are yet to obtain a license, they cannot sell new niches, so they may face financial difficulties anytime, so the government must have a backup plan for them. And also, some criticize that the bill is moving the goalpost for substandard columbarium. Now, there are a number of columbarium which strove to meet the conditions from earlier on to obtaining a license, and this bill is unfair to them. Now, I support the government's decision to avoid triggering a large-scale ash disposal operation. And I agree that there is no unfairness to speak of, because for those columbarium which will cease operation, they will be closed anyway because they are unable to fulfill the conditions. And also, it is not unfair to those columbarium which have obtained a license because they are allowed to sell niches. Deputy President, the passage of this bill does not mean that the deep-rooted issues are all resolved. Quite to the contrary, there are a lot of follow-up work to be done. So I hope the government would report the latest progress to the LegCo regularly. For example, the number of cases still pending, and also the KPI should be set for interdepartmental coordination, and also the enforcement progress should be reported to us. There must be a transparent monitoring and oversight mechanism to ensure that the policy intents are served. Thank you.
Mr. Tang Fei. Madam Deputy, I speak in support of the Private Columbaria Amendment Bill 2024. It's a long story. The story is not complicated, but it's a finicky matter. We need enough regulation for private columbaria. When there are 5 safety, food, environmental hygiene regulations, we need regulation. But land is at a premium in Hong Kong. We are short of public niches, so that explains the rise of private columbaria. But then irregularities also followed. So this long-standing problem has been around for a long time indeed, and as another member said, this problem spans 2 terms of LegCo, and there's also a cultural aspect to the issue. We want to foster traditional Chinese culture in Hong Kong. So, in the light of that, let's not underestimate the cultural significance of this bill and the follow-up work. As other members have said, we honor the deceased, we honor our ancestors. For a Chinese community, funeral and burial matters are very important. People visit graves during Qingming and Tongyang Festival. Chinese people honor their ancestors. Urbanization means there are challenges for niches. We're short of space, so we have private columbaria, and then there are also unauthorized niches. With those unauthorized places, there are safety hazards. Those people breach the rules, they breach our town planning rules, they are in breach of the law. We don't want them. So in the end, consumers suffer. So with this bill, we are striking a balance. With land at a premium, we want to promote Chinese culture. We want to preserve this fine tradition of honoring the deceased. At the same time, we want stronger regulation. There are Columbaria who still struggle to meet the requirements for a license. So we grant exemption. We give those Columbaria time to meet the licensing requirements. If they fail to do that by then, they have to cease operation. So this time we're taking a graded approach to management. Now, an exemption holder will not be able to sell new niches or do new LEDs. Without a license, they cannot scale up their operation. Now, with this bill, we're also granting an exemption to Masons workshops. So there's a grace period for Masons workshops. So we have looked after the needs of different trades. On the one hand, we don't want rule breakers. With the exemption, we're also better protecting consumers. We want to avoid massive ash disposal. We can imagine the consequences from such a massive disposal. So this is a balancing act. Such a disposal will mean re-traumatizing people whose loved ones have passed away. So let's get the publicity right. Now, when we say exemption, we have to be careful. Without clear and adequate publicity, people may get the wrong message. They think exemption means they get the green light. They think those Columbaria with an exemption are fine. People may indeed form such a false impression. And people will form the mistaken impression that Columbaria with an exemption meet the rules. That's why clear and enough publicity will be needed. Hong Kong is only 1,106 square kilometers big, and there are 7,000 people for every square kilometer. So we're short of land. As at 2024, there were 87 Columbaria, private Columbaria that fell short of the requirements, and that involved more than 10,000 sets of ashes. We also want to promote green burial. We should do that. The traditional to do it is to bury the body, and then you go to cremation, and then you move on to niches. You're short of land. Hong Kong is only that big. And the situation will get worse. So we need a more centralized and eco-friendly way to deal with ashes, and that's unavoidable. That's why we need the public education in place. We're striking a balance between three factors. One, the relationship between public and private Columbaria. We need more public niches, but this will be tough because we only have that much space. And then there are people who simply prefer private Columbaria to their public counterparts. Two, It's a balance between ash disposal and exemption. And then we're also balancing the needs of masons, workshops, and other stakeholders. The government has done the best possible job. In this case, we have minimized the cost for different parties. We should be praising the government. So instead of pointing the finger at different government departments for their slow work, but this legislative exercise shows we are minimizing the impact and costs for different stakeholders, and we should commend the government for this. And finally, publicity matters. And that would mean a few things. One, we should be reviewing our work. And two, after the bill's passage, let's stay in touch with the trade. And for the public, we have to promote green burial, traditional Chinese culture. It's not simply inheriting whatever we already have. We should be creating new culture. I so submit. This is Chan Hao-Yan. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Every year, more than 50,000 people die. At some point, everyone dies. When a loved one passes away, we want proper burial for the person, and that's a major decision. We have already managed to drive a cultural shift. Many people now accept cremation, so their ashes are now in niches. For a long time in the past, there was a shortage of public niches, so people opted for private niches. But there was no regulated private columbaria, so there were all kinds of niches in the market. There were places with niches. Those places were in breach of town planning or building safety laws. So in 2017, the private columbaria ordinance was enacted. A licensing regime came into being to make sure private columbaria met various statutory and government requirements that protected consumers' rights and interests. That also prompted the trade to opt to go for more sustainable models of development. But over the years, we can see that the trade indeed meet the requirements. We also have the Private Columbaria Licensing Board. Still, there are complexities and all kinds of problems, and that has culminated in the slow progress in the approval of licensees, so people got worried. Now, before this licensing regime came into place, some people had already bought niches in private columbaria. Some ashes were already interred. If such columbaria cannot meet the licensing requirements in the end, then the worst scenario of all will happen, and that is ash disposal. Tens of thousands of families will be affected. Now we are getting this amendment bill pre-cut-off columbaria meeting certain conditions, and that is meaning those columbaria in operation before 8 a.m. on the 18th of June 2014, those columbaria meeting certain conditions will be able to apply for an exemption. This is simple. This is pragmatic, and we can avoid massive ash disposal. Those columbaria will be able to operate at a confined scale. And this time we're also stiffening the fines and jail terms, and we're also creating and revising offenses to achieve a greater deterrent effect. This will serve to crack down on rule breakers in the trade. During the consultation for the bill, we got submissions from the trade and columbaria operators. The Bills Committee also met with groups of people, groups running those columbaria. We found out about the challenges. Now, for some columbaria and operators still struggling with the licensees, they worked hard to meet the government's requirements. They did their best to try to meet the town planning, building safety requirements, and also the traffic impact assessment, etc. They wanted to meet the licensing requirements, but then due to various reasons, their applications stalled. Therefore, traditional temples and religious premises. And then there were also cases where the land does not meet the requirements for columbaria. Those applications were rejected. There was an operator in Fort Han. More than 5,100 niches are involved, and there are already more than 6,000 sets of ashes. So that operator agreed not to sell new niches. the planning department, the transport department have already given the green light, so that operator was allowed to keep the interred ashes. But then the history of a rejection by the TPB got in the way, and that's because of a 100-meter long road that's shared with other people, and that became a stumbling block. That's because the criteria for this exemption include the absence of rejection by the town planning board. So given that, this Columbaria may have to cease operation. The point about this bill is to avoid massive ash disposal and displacing ashes. So I hope the government can review this case and give support. Let's not disturb the ashes of those who have already passed away. Now we got another case. It's a religious body, a non-profit making body. This body serves the faithful, and for their brethren, this body offers burial of and interment of ashes. But then this licensing regime is too rigid because the religious operation is treated as a business operation. Even with this bill's passage, I hope the government can pay attention to the problems confronting the trade. Let's go that extra mile. Let's talk to each other. Now, I want to bring up consumer protection, and here again, we should also go the extra mile. We got cases. A senior got a receipt many years ago because this senior bought a niche many years ago. They used their old name, which was not the same as the name that showed up on their HKID card. I know this is out of scope for this bill, but when we deal with the licensees for private Columbaria, can we have templates for contracts about purchasing niches? Can we have a clause saying, say, when the Columbaria close, there should be a way to deal with the ashes? And when people change the dedicated person for a niche, such things should be covered in standard contracts, and that would mean better protection for consumers. Our population is aging, and our city is also becoming more compact. And that means we have to think about how we can achieve sustainable development in niches. With an aging population, we get more and more seniors, and that means growing demand for burial services. But we are very much short of space in the city. The traditional approach to burial puts pressure on the environment, and that is becoming more and more visible. Back in 2018, the projection was that by 2047, we will be short of 1.1 million public niches by 2047. Now, green burial will take pressure off resources. Green burial is also more eco-friendly. Ashes can be scattered in memorial parks or at sea, and it's also a return to nature. That's also a way to show respect to life. There are merits with green burial, but green burial has yet to take hold in Hong Kong. Some people have reservations, have doubts, and that has to do with traditional beliefs or religious faiths. And that explains the hesitancy. For green burial, acceptance of green burial went up from 8.4% in 2014 to 18% by October 2024. It was improvement, but we can do better. So we need public education and publicity. Let's organize visits to the memorial parks under the FEHD. Let's raise the awareness of green burial. Let's help people get a better idea of green burial so that we can encourage people to adopt greener and more sustainable ways of handling what remains of their ancestors. And let's also plan ahead before we pass away. I so submit, I support this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Tommy Chung, Deputy President, the Liberal Party supports the Private Columbaria Amendment Bill 2024. The major purpose of the bill is to offer an option to the 10-odd pre-cut-off Columbaria that were still operating before the 18th of June 2014. This is to avoid massive disposal of ashes. According to statistics, as at the 30th of November 2024, 59 pre-cut-off private Columbaria submitted applications. This involves 490,000 niches, of which about 300,000 niches were sold. Among these 59 Columbaria, 11 are applying for exemptions. The rest of them, 48, because they failed to meet the relevant requirements, they did not submit applications for exemptions. This involves about 287,000 niches. If these 48 Columbaria fail to meet all the specified requirements, they'll have to close down, and the 280,000 niches will see massive disposal of ashes. Such a scale of disposal of ashes may spark complaints in the community, and this is not desirable. Those granted licenses or exemptions, they may sell or let out niches, and the licensing conditions they have to meet have to do with land, town planning, and buildings, and it's not easy to meet these requirements. Now, for those who apply for exemptions, they may not sell or newly let out niches, but they may have the ashes interred in a niche before the cutoff time, kept in that niche. To be granted exemptions, there are two requirements that are hard to be met. First, that is the Columbaria concerned, they have to start running before the 1st of January 1990, and also, as at the cutoff date, they had ceased the sale of interment rights, and therefore a lot of Columbaria did not submit applications for exemptions. The bill proposes relaxing the commencement date as well as the date for the cessation of sale of interment rights, so that more private Columbaria will be able to meet the specified requirements and that they will be able to operate in the current confined scale. It is also proposed under the bill that the private Columbaria will have to meet certain requirements, that is, their application is being dealt with and that the Columbaria concerned are not located in RA zone. Also, they shouldn't have any application rejected by the town planning board before the cutoff date to minimize the disturbances to the neighborhood. The bill also introduces new offenses concerning overselling of niches and overplacing of niches. Earlier, in Wahopshek, as well as in other places, the government rolled out 16,000 niches for the public. For families that have purchased niches, they want to respect their loved ones and keep the ashes in the niches. I think this bill is not perfect, but this is a bill that has struck a balance. I speak on behalf of the Liberal Party to express my support to the bill, but I urge the administration to speed up the approval and vetting process for the licenses to respond to the community's needs. I so submit. Thank you. Mr. Ambrose Lam, Deputy President. We are short of land in Hong Kong. Land resources are scarce. Not just homes for the living, but also homes for the dead are expensive. About 50,000 people pass away every year in Hong Kong. As our society keeps aging, the number of deaths will continue to rise, and there will be a higher demand for niches in Hong Kong. There's a shortage of supply, but the demand keeps rising. Therefore, there are many private columbaria in Hong Kong. In 2017, the government enacted the Private Columbaria Ordinance to regulate private columbaria. Private columbaria have to meet certain requirements to protect the consumers' interests and rights. Some private columbaria are not issued with licenses, and their operating environment is not ideal. They have not been able to be granted licenses. Those that are unlicensed, I have visited some of them. Well, I have visited some of the licensed private columbaria. There is a lack of space. If you place a table there, it will block the corridor. In case there is a fire, it will cause deaths and casualties. Not to mention those that oversell niches. Each licensed private columbaria will have to meet the licensing conditions and meet the number of niches they offer. The purpose of this bill is to allow the pre-cut-off columbaria that were running before the 18th of June 2014 to apply for exemption so that they can continue to operate their premises. It is also to enhance the penalties for certain offenses. For columbaria that oversell niches and overplace niches, the penalties will go up from $10,000 of fine to $50,000. This is controversial. We rarely see fines that go up from $10,000 to $5 million. I have reservation about this, but I think the increase is reasonable. Each niche costs about $200,000 to $300,000. The more expensive ones cost about $800,000 to even $1 million. I agree that the penalty should go up to $5 million to create deterrence. This does not mean that the judge would impose a fine of $5 million necessarily, as long as there are mitigations from the defendant. This is just to allow for flexibility for courts to effectively penalize the offenders depending on the severity of the offenses. At the Bills Committee, I was happy to learn that the government has been proactively constructing new columbaria. As far as I understand, some people do not even have to wait to get the niches. The niches are as cheap as $2,400 for 20 years. That's $100 per year. This is 1% of the market price. I understand that the government is offering welfare benefits to the community by building these columbaria, but this is against, or this runs counter to the green barrier policy. With a fiscal deficit, the government should think of how to recover costs to break evens. Take the Zhengzhou columbaria as an example. In 2015, the government spent $2.8 billion to build 100,000 niches. They are for rent for 20 years. Each year, it costs about $2,400. The government could only recover $380 billion, losing about $2.5 billion. That means the niches will have to be let out for 150 years in order for the government to balance the books. Every year, during the home sweeping days, we have police officers maintaining the order. We also have other costs incurred. I therefore suggested the government increasing the price of the public niches so that the government could recover the costs, and at the same time it should encourage green burial. Also, there are penalties of up to $5 million for those that oversell niches, but there is a lack of effective mechanism to prevent overselling of niches. For niches in private columbaria, they can be as expensive as $1 or $2 million. With good feng shui, there would definitely be overselling of niches, and even with $5 million of penalties, offenders could still make gains. Consumers will suffer. There is a registration system for rates for stamp duties. How come there isn't a ownership titles registration system for private niches? We have a high demand for niches. If the government does not manage these niches, there will be chaos. I therefore suggest that the government improve the regulation over private niches and set up a registration system. This will protect consumers' interests. The government should also consider imposing a stamp duty. It could be 3% of the rental price or sale price. As at November 2024, 59 private columbaria are applying for licenses. It involves 180,000 niches that are unsold. Private niche costs about $200,000 each. It is expected that if the government imposes stamp duty, it can recover about $1 billion. Say 10,000 niches are sold every year, it could bring to the public coffers $60 million. I so submit. Thank you.
Mr. Ban Chen, Deputy President, since the enactment of the ordinance in 2017, there are only a few private columbarium operators which have obtained a license successfully. Now, almost 10 years have passed since the enactment of the ordinance, and yet there are only so few operators who can get a license. It highlights that there are some problems. Now, this bill may be the government bowing down to the reality. To avoid displacement of ashes, the government is relaxing the eligibility, but that's only a reasonable thing to do, so I support the bill. Now, in the enforcement process, there are some issues that I have observed, and I think the government should consider that besides the new pathway for exemption, there are some areas which can be improved to speed up the application process and make the application process less of a pain. There are a lot of departments involved in the approval process. Just imagine how much resources were spent on processing these applications over the past 10 years. Planning, transport, lands, and so on. There are so many hoops to jump through. Now, there are some cases where one department remains to offer comments on the application. The applicant has to visit the department for 5 times just to answer a petty question. Numerous site inspections were conducted by the department every time new problem would be spotted. They are raising the issues one after another, and there is endless ratifications to be made. The entire process involved a lot of professionals on both the applicants and the government side. It wasted the applicants' money to hire professionals, and it wasted time on the government's part. It's just about a 3 centimeters encroachment into an area. The the doorbell needs to be placed at a different location. These are the sort of problems they were raising. These can actually be rectified or improved after the approval is granted. There is a culture that departments try not to be the first departments to offer a consent, because if an irregularity is spotted afterwards, they would be held accountable. So with this kind of culture, I believe that in another 10 years' time, we will have to offer another new pathway for exemption, because no one is able to get a license. So there must be a high-level official to be able to decide whether this is a serious contravention. If this is not a serious contravention, just give the license to the applicant. You can't have a perfect applicant. Sometimes the niche is located in the innermost location in the village. So you need to fulfill all the fire safety requirements and have an independent road access to the niche. You also need to get the approval to use the road by the village. Every household in the village must give the consent, and the land title involved is complicated. You need to get the right of way from each of the villagers. This is what the government is asking the operators to do. Now we understand that the governmental departments need to be prudent. But where discretion can be exercised, the departments would err on the safe side and refuse the applications, because in a few months' time, there would be a new team handling the applications already. So concerning the issue of columbarium, the government should study how, in handling the applications from operators, the government departments can list the green light for operators with very minor irregularities. You can't drag this on indefinitely, because it is a question of using public money. So I hope all the government departments involved in the process can sit down and think about this. Just turn some screws loose. We can't use a microscope to vet each application. This is a deep-rooted issue which requires a pragmatic approach to solve. That's the mindset that modern officials should have. Thank you. Mr. Tony Xie. Thank you, Deputy President. Now, there is a saying that land is the scarce resource in Hong Kong. It doesn't just affect the housing supply for the living. It also affects the afterlife of the deceased. Now, there is not enough land for land burial. Even for cremation, there is a lack of supply in the private markets because of fire safety regulations. Now, some private columbarium charge a high fee, but there is a lack of protection for consumers. Now, 10 years ago, the government began to attack the question head-on, and the government began to build more public columbarium niches in more places. It's only in recent years that the supply has increased. Now, in 2014, the government first proposed the Private Columbaria Bill with a view to regulating the standard and uses of Columbaria to minimize the impact on the neighborhood, as well as regulating the sale of niches by Columbarium. More regulation were put in place to protect consumers. Now, back in 2014, I was a member of the Bills Committee. It took almost 2 years' time with some 30 meetings. And yet, we were unable to pass the bill in the same legislative term. Now, besides the issue of filibustering back then, another reason is that the regulatory regime was rather complicated. There are various types of private columbarium of various scales. The structures, shapes, and size were different, and also the management standard varies. There are a large number of irregularities. Now, a stringent across-the-board approach of enforcement would result in massive dispersal or disposal of interred ashes. Now, it was not until 2017 when the subsequent term of LegCo passed the bill. Now, this Private Columbaria Amendment Bill 2024 reflects that the situation is indeed complicated. Now, since the enactment of the principal ordinance, 7 years on, only 13 private columbarium were granted a license, and only 5 columbarium were issued with an exemption. Now, this involved some 200,000 niches. There are also 77 columbarium involving some 500,000 sets of ashes. The application for a license or exemption is still pending. Among them, 48 columbarium may have to cease operation if the application fails in the end. It would involve some 287,000 sets of niches or ashes. Now, if all of these ashes are disposed of in the future, it will result in a massive disturbance. Now, the bill offers a new pathway for applying for exemptions so that private columbarium fulfilling certain conditions in terms of building and fire safety can continue to operate at a confined scale despite of the time when they started the operation. Now, after the relaxation of the eligibility, at least 38 columbarium involving some 273,000 sets of ashes will become eligible for the exemption after the bill's passage. Now, some operators think that it may result in unfairness. However, from the perspective of public interest, I think this is a pragmatic approach. Now, besides the relaxation of the exemption regime, there are also a number of amendments to the enforcement regime. For example, raising the penalty level for certain offenses, prohibiting overselling and overplacing of ashes, and also enhancing the appeal mechanism. Also, the temporary storage period for eligible masons' workshop has been extended. Reference has been drawn from the practical experience of the principal ordinance and has catered for unforeseeable circumstances, so I support the bill. Now, there was a lot of discussion about the enforcement of the law and also the efficiency of enforcement. Now, in my sector, many stakeholders told me that in the application process to the TPB, since it involves a lot of departments, the application process is unduly complicated. Now, the administration has promised to expedite the relevant procedures and enhance the work of the PCAO to help these applicants. I hope that the government will fulfill its promise. Now, sometimes it seems that the government is only enhancing the deterrence by increasing the penalty. However, does the government have sufficient manpower to enforce the law effectively? Let's say after the passage of the bill and despite of the enhanced penalty, there are still a lot of contraventions. Does it mean that the trade is not well aware of how the law works? And is it the case that the government has neglected the operating difficulties faced by operators? I think the government should not be complacent and think that simply by raising the penalty, you can address all the issues. Now, in terms of public education, there are 3 suggestions. First, we need to enhance the awareness of the public towards the new regime. Consumers must understand what kind of columbarium are allowed to sell niches. If contraventions are identified and if scams are involved, the public must know where to file a complaint. Second, we need to increase supply of columbarium niches and also the after-sales services. Now, many members of the public do not understand when they can apply for a public niche, and there is the misconception that public columbarium are of a lower quality compared with the private ones, and that there are lots of restrictions. Third, in recent years, more and more people, including elderly people, are agreeable to the idea of green burial. But there is a misconception that if the ashes are scattered in a garden or on the sea, the surviving family members will not have a place to worship the ancestors. It would be disruptive to the long-standing Chinese tradition of familial piety. Now we must step up education and enhance the existing green burial services and facilitate worshipping of ancestors by surviving family members. We need to drive the point that it doesn't mean that the family members cannot worship the ancestors if the ashes are scattered. I also submit to support the bill and the amendments.
Professor Chan Min-kong. Madam Deputy. In 2017, the private Columbaria Ordinance Cap 630 took effect. That was to make sure private columbarium met legal requirements that was to safeguard consumers' rights and also ensure sustainable development of such columbaria. Under that ordinance, a private columbarium can apply for 3 kinds of specified instruments: licenses or exemptions or temporary suspension of liability. That's to keep the columbarium running. Hong Kong's population is aging, and this is unprecedented. There's rigid demand for niches, public and private. Every year, 50,000 people die. For 90% of such cases, those ashes need to be interred somewhere. For half of them, the ashes go to public niches. This bill covers private columbaria's niches. So far, applications from 77 private columbaria are under consideration for various kinds of SIs. Most of these columbaria are pre-cut-off columbaria. So this bill is about enhancing the regulatory regime for private columbaria. Now, for some columbaria, they ceased operation because they could not obtain a license. These columbaria may have to fold, and there will be large-scale ash disposal. That's why we're amending the law. We want to allow some of these columbaria that meet conditions to get an exemption so that they can stay in business. With this bill, we're also stiffening the penalties on overselling of niches and overplacing. And this proposal is justified in legal and sentimental ways, so I support this bill. Now, the Columbaria will have to meet the fire safety and building services requirements before they're eligible. A columbarium cannot be a densely populated residential area. And if large-scale ash disposal happens, that will bring emotional distress and also losses to families, and that will also lead people to question the government, and that's bad for social cohesion. With that in mind, the government has made this wise decision to come up with this proposal. Some private columbaria may have to fold. So we have this bill. We take into account various factors to minimize the socio-economic costs, and there will be no impact on the supply of public and private columbarium niches. The Bills Committee had an in-depth discussion of the provisions of the bill, so I won't go into the specifics. I do want to take this opportunity to urge the government to consider our population changes and make long-term plans for public and private niches. And based on the CNSD's figures, in 2031, we will see 60,000 deaths each year, and by 2046, that number will rise to 80,000 deaths each year. And that will simply mean ever-growing demand for niches. Private niches are costlier. But for families on higher income, they can benefit from the greater certainty from private columbaria. Now, for 2020, in Tangzhou, there's a columbarium that was built in 2020 with 163,000 niches. For those ashes, they have to be relocated every 10 years. Will the future generations of a family be happy with this arrangement, relocating the ashes every 10 years? This is against traditional Chinese culture. Let's fix it. And this is also bad for social cohesion. Now, at public columbaria, there are time limits on how long you can put the ashes there, whereas people can put ashes in a niche in perpetuity in private columbaria, and we have to do something about this problem. Niches and columbaria are in coastal areas that are sparsely populated. We need to build more columbaria and niches to meet this rigid demand from the community. I support this bill's second and third reading and also its passage. I so submit. Mr. Porter. President, in principle, I support the government's proposal. This is a long-standing issue that has dragged on for more than 10 years. I have an impression there's a parallel universe. From what the government and other members have said, we get the impression that there is much abuse, many consumers suffered, so we are massively bumping up the penalties from $1 million to $5 million. That's the maximum fine for some offenses. Other members also discussed the nitpicking in the approval process. Government departments were being unrealistic, and that led to the slow progress in approving licenses. And that leads to the problems over the years. We only got dozens of applications. And now we're even lengthening the deadline for applying for exemption. We see the need. Without an extension, some ashes will have to be disposed of I get it. We support this proposal in terms of its direction. But I want to share some observations. The first point is massively ramping up penalties. This morning, the Secretary for Environment and Ecology was here. We were talking about fixed penalty rising to $6,000. It appeared to work. But when complex cases reached the court, the fines were below the fixed penalty level. Of course, we don't want anyone without a license to sell niches. We should indeed hand down tough penalties. There were only roughly 10 cases in which an operator failed to meet the requirements. In those cases, when the operator failed to meet the requirement, they would be in breach of the law. The fine used to be $10,000. But those cases were few and far between, just 10 cases or so, if my memory does not fail me. Now we are raising the fine from $10,000 to $5 million and 2 years in imprisonment. When we massively stiffen the fine, that's usually because of prevalent abuse. Without such an increase in penalties, our law enforcement will struggle to cope. We don't have enough deterrent effect, but this is an unusual case. The government cannot explain. This government simply said those operators have a profitable business. Those operators made money over the fist some time ago. But now the operators are struggling. Some such operators are charitable bodies. I fail to see why the government thinks those operators having a hard time are making money hand over fist, and that's why the government is massively increasing the penalties. That's what I mean by this parallel universe. There's a figure, 77,300. Not sure if I got the number right. So these are spare slots. When issues come up, when ashes are displaced, there are slots to accommodate such ashes. The usage rate stands at only 4%. So we have 96% of the capacity idle. So if I'm getting this right, actually people don't have to worry if something goes wrong. The displaced ashes can be accommodated somewhere. Now I turn to my third point. We just heard about 16,000 niches from the government. These niches are for let. These niches are very affordable, even cheaper than public rental housing. Application for these niches are easy, so people don't have to be worried about displaced ashes going nowhere. So why this massive increase in penalty levels? I struggle to find an answer. One justification cited by the government is that there was a public consultation and then more than 90% of the respondents supported the proposal. I am skeptical about public consultations where more than 90% of the respondents supported a proposal. When you look at the public consultations more closely, usually the support levels are lower. The devil is in the details. So let's look at the questions during the public consultation. Those questions were leading consultations. The questions are something more like suggesting the Pope is Catholic. And then there were also questions where people were asked to check a box. So this public consultation is cited as justification. So one question goes like, do you support increasing the penalty to $5 million? Do you support it? And do you support increasing the penalty to $5 million or 2 years in jail for overselling, overplacing? So the support rates were 90%, 88%. I wonder how many of these respondents were reliable respondents, and so I question the reliability of this data. The government wants to promote green burial, but at the same time, it is increasing public niches. The government says it's taking a pragmatic and sympathetic approach. For users, of course, people don't want to see ash disposal. Now, for people who truly know the industry, there's an impression that there is an attempt to clamp down on operators of Columbaria, and we have all these undue worries about their law-breaking behavior, and when we're trying to browbeat those people, we're trying to scare them with jail terms. So, as a matter of principle, I support the bill. Some applicants may need assistance from the government. This reliance on harsh penalties as a way to disguise problems in the administration is something I have reservations about.
Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I now call upon the Secretary for Environment and Ecology to reply, then the debate will come to a close. Secretary. President, I give my heartfelt thanks to the Chairperson of the Bills Committee on the Private Columbaria Amendment Bill 2024, Ms. Eunice Young, and also the efforts made by the members and secretariats of the Bills Committee so that the bill could be scrutinized in time. I also thank all the members for their invaluable opinions given during the scrutiny work. Now, the Private Columbaria Ordinance was established in 2017. Through the ordinance, a licensing regime was established to regulate private columbarium, including new operators and also columbarium which were in operation with ashes interred before 8 a.m. on the 18th of June 2014 when the proposed licensing regime was announced. Under the principle of pragmatism and sympathy, the government has been rectifying the past irregularities of private columbaria and also implemented various measures to strengthen consumer protection. Now, since the enactment of the ordinance, 8 years have passed. Certain pre-cut-off columbarium may have difficulties in complying with the licensing conditions. As a result, they may not be able to get a license, and it may trigger large-scale ash disposal. Now, according to past experience, we propose to enhance the regulatory regime and enhance consumer protection. That's why we have proposed certain amendments to the bill, to the ordinance. Now, one of the major proposals is to provide a new option for applying for exemption by pre-cut-off columbarium. There are now 48 pre-cut-off columbaria which are ineligible or have passed the deadline to apply for an exemption. The only pathway for them is to apply for a license. Let's say if some of them are unable to comply with all the licensing conditions within the period, then they will have to cease operation according to the ordinance. It will trigger large-scale ash disposal and affect the buyers of niches or family members with ashes interred. Now, in the spirit of pragmatism and sympathy, we propose to adjust the eligibility for applying for exemption so that an additional option to apply for exemption is provided for eligible pre-cut-off columbaria. Successful applicants can keep the niches sold and continue to operate at the present scale to avoid ash disposal and minimize the impact on the neighboring community. Another purpose of the bill is to strengthen protection for consumers. Now, during the review process, we are aware that under the existing legislation, the maximum penalty for overselling of niches is a level 3 fine, that is $10,000. It is unproportional to the potential profits to be gained from unauthorized selling of niches. And also certain contraventions, for example, selling niches beyond the approved plan or selling interment rights beyond the capacity of the columbarium, that is overselling or overplacing. There is not an individual or separate offense for these contraventions. So we propose to provide for a new offense and raise the existing penalty to enhance the deterrence, to deter columbaria from breaking the law and enhancing the public's confidence. And also the bill proposed to enhance the operation of the appeal board so that only when there are special grounds can the appeal board consider and receive new materials. This is to ensure that the same standard is adopted by appeal board members and also make the arrangements clearer to the appellant. Another purpose of the bill is to enhance the administrative arrangements for eligible masons' workshops. We will clearly specify the exemption. Now, the operation of masons' workshops involve interment of ashes, and inevitably they need to keep ashes temporarily in the workshop. Now, we propose to increase the time period where when the mason's workshop can keep ashes from 7 calendar days to 14 calendar days to cater for the delay in mason work or inclement weather. Now, subject to the passage of the bill, the licensing board will consider various factors, for example, past operating experience, in deciding the length of the validity period for new application for exemption. Now, after prescribing for a validity period, the PCAO will notify each eligible applicants and help them understand their new responsibilities under the bill by way of a case manager. Now, I thank the Bills Committee for holding 3 meetings to scrutinize the provisions of the bill to enhance the contents of the bill. At the committee stage, I will move an amendment to amend the bill. These are technical amendments in response to the Bills Committee's suggestions. It will help the public to understand the bill better. Now, many members have urged the government to speed up the approval process so that eligible columbaria can get the license or exemption sooner. Now, actually, the progress depends on whether the applicants have rectified the irregularities and also the progress of the rectification. Now, the PCAO has pledged to step up the one-stop service provided to applicants, and the PCAO will provide tailor-made help to each application and coordinates between departments. If necessary, meetings with the relevant departments will be held. The PCAO will also require all relevant departments to provide comments within 3 weeks from the date of circulation of documents, or provide initial comments with explanation on why full comments cannot be provided. We believe that these measures will help pre-cut-off columbaria complete ratification sooner and get a license or exemption. President, the bill will help resolve the historical issue of pre-cut-off columbarium and further enhance the regulatory regime on private columbarium. We will continue to promote green burial at the same time. I implore members to pass the bill, to support the bill's passage and the CSA to be moved by me. I so submit.
I now put the question to you that the Private Columbaria Amendment Bill 2024 be read the second time. With those in favor, please raise their hands. Those against, please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of the members present. I declare the motion passed. Private Columbaria Amendment Bill 2024. This council now becomes Committee of the Whole Council to consider